It was just another walk home, or so I thought. I was 16, heading down my usual route through the quiet residential streets, the sun dipping low behind tall trees, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I lived close enough that the walk always felt routine, never something to worry about. There was nothing special about it, just another day, until I noticed the car. It was a black sedan, old but well-maintained, parked along the side of the street. At first it seemed perfectly ordinary, just another car in the neighborhood. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A man, standing beside the sedan. He wore what looked like a police uniform. Tall, with a stiff, almost robotic posture, he gave off an air of authority that made me instinctively want to steer clear. But something was off. His uniform didn't fit right. It wasn't just a little too big. It was like he had thrown it on without a second thought. No badge, no official car. Just him, standing there, staring at me. My gut told me to keep walking, but his eyes seemed to follow my every step. I quickened my pace, trying not to look back, but I could feel his gaze burning into me, heavy and unsettling. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a plainclothes officer or someone just taking a stroll. Then I heard it. "Hey, miss." His voice was deep, commanding, the kind of voice that made you want to stop in your tracks. But I didn't. I kept walking, heart racing, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "Miss," he called again, louder this time, more insistent. "I need to talk to you." My pulse shot up. I tried to ignore him, my legs moving faster now, but his footsteps grew louder, closer. "You fit the description of a runaway," he said, his tone flat, emotionless. "I'm going to need you to come with me." A runaway? I wasn't wearing anything that screamed runaway. I was dressed in my school uniform, backpack slung over my shoulder. Nothing about me looked suspicious. Why was he alone, without a patrol car, without backup? My stomach twisted. "I'm not a runaway," I said, voice trembling. "I'm just walking home from school." He didn't seem to care. Without warning, his hand shot out, grabbing my arm in a vice-like grip. "I'm going to need you to come with me," he repeated, his fingers digging into my skin. "You can explain everything at the station." My mind screamed no. This wasn't right. This wasn't how police officers acted. Not in the middle of a quiet street with no backup, no car. This isn't real. I tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened, pulling me closer to him. Panic flooded my veins. "I need to call my mom first," I stammered, heart pounding. "She'll clear everything up. You don't need to call anyone. Let me go." "Don't let go," he snapped, his voice hard. My instincts screamed louder than ever. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. This man wasn't who he claimed to be. Every warning bell in my head rang at full force. In that instant, I did the only thing I could think of. I yanked my arm free. With all the strength I had, I bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I ran until I spotted a house a few blocks down, lights on in the windows. Without hesitating, I pounded on the door, gasping for air. "Please help me," I cried. "A man is trying to take me." Before I could say another word, the door swung open, and a middle-aged woman pulled me inside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was hammering in my chest as I tried to explain what had happened, the words tumbling out in frantic gasps. "He said he was a cop," I managed to say, "but I don't think he really is. He grabbed me. I couldn't even finish." The woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 while her husband stood by the window peering through the curtains. I joined him, looking out into the street, but there was no sign of the man. Minutes later, the real police arrived. They took my statement, asking me everything about the man, what he looked like, what he'd said, how he had grabbed me. They reassured me they'd investigate, but there was something in their eyes that told me they were already concerned. They drove me home that night, and my parents were beside themselves. My mum hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe, and my dad's usually calm demeanor was shattered, his face pale with fear. But the real horror came a week later. The police found the man's car abandoned in a parking lot not far from where I'd been stopped. Inside, they discovered fake police equipment, uniforms, badges, even a siren light for a dashboard. This man had been preparing for these encounters. He had done this before, but they couldn't find him. He was gone. Vanished. No trace, no explanation. Just a black sedan, empty, and a disturbing realization that he could still be out there, watching, waiting for his next victim. The police assured me they were doing everything they could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. For weeks, every time I stepped outside, my heart would race. Every car that passed, every figure I saw in the distance made my blood run cold. I never walked alone again. The story spread quickly through the neighborhood, whispers swirling about the man in the black sedan. Neighbors began recalling strange sightings, someone who looked like a cop, always lurking around schools or parks, but no one could ever confirm who he really was or where he'd gone. The unsettling truth, he might have done this before, maybe in another city, or maybe he'd been successful before, and I was just one of the lucky ones. But what about the others? How many people had he lured in before? I'll never forget the way his hand gripped my arm, pulling me towards something I couldn't even comprehend. It's a feeling I'll carry with me forever. Danger doesn't always come in the form of a monster. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it pretends to be the very thing you're supposed to trust. And that's what makes it truly terrifying. I wasn't alone on the road that night, but I should have been. I never would have believed what happened if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It was a typical Thursday evening at my friend Tara's. A few friends, pizza, board games, and endless chatter. Nothing out of the ordinary. I stayed a little later than I had planned, mainly because Tara and I got into this intense debate during a card game. One of those I'm right, no, you're wrong kind of conversations. It was almost midnight before I finally decided to head home. I live about 45 minutes away, down a stretch of rural highway, the kind of place where it's more likely you'll see a deer than another car. And that's exactly how I liked it. The quiet, empty road gave me time to think, a peaceful drive with no distractions. So I grabbed the last slice of pizza, said my goodbyes, and got in the car. The air outside was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Just a quiet night, perfect for the short drive home. For the first 20 minutes, it was as expected, just me, the road, and my thoughts. The radio was on low, a soft background hum as I mentally went through the list of things I needed to do the next day. But then, in the corner of my rearview mirror, I saw something that jolted me from my thoughts. Headlights. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was rare to see another car this late, but it wasn't impossible. Maybe it was someone else on a late-night drive. I wasn't speeding. In fact, I was barely going under the speed limit. But those headlights were getting closer, and fast. I checked my speedometer again, still under the limit, but the car kept closing in. I didn't know why, but I felt a sudden unease crawl up my spine. It wasn't just that the car was approaching too quickly. It was the way the headlights burned through my mirror, like they were glaring at me. Intentional. Before I could process it, the car's headlights flashed red and blue. I froze. A cop? At this hour? What the hell had I done? Sure, maybe I had a taillight out or something, but this felt excessive. I sighed and pulled over, signaling to the side of the road. The car behind me followed suit, but something felt off. I glanced back in my mirror. The headlights stayed on bright, not dimmed like they should have been. This wasn't right. I squinted to try and see who was behind the wheel, but all I could make out was a dark shadow. No uniform, no badge, no nothing. I couldn't even see his face. My stomach twisted. The car's engine shut off, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. This wasn't how traffic stops were supposed to go. The figure stepped out of the car, moving toward mine. He wasn't wearing a police uniform, nothing that resembled law enforcement. Just dark jeans and a jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. My gut tightened. He didn't have a flashlight either. What kind of cop doesn't carry a flashlight at night? I rolled the window down a crack, trying to stay calm, but my voice betrayed me. "Evening," I said, forcing my tone to stay steady. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked in a gravelly voice. It wasn't the voice of a cop. It was rough, like someone who'd smoked too many cigarettes or had no interest in being polite. "No, I wasn't speeding," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. But he didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned closer, his eyes scanning my car like he was searching for something or someone. It was the kind of look that made your skin crawl. It was wrong. And then it hit me. There was no badge, no name tag, nothing that indicated he was an officer. I could feel my pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. My hand instinctively hovered over my phone, but I stopped myself. "Don't do anything stupid. You need to step out of the car," he said, his voice flat and demanding. My heart pounded in my chest. Something was seriously wrong. I looked around. Where was everyone else? I glanced back at the rearview mirror, hoping to see another car, or someone to confirm that I wasn't just being paranoid. But no. The car behind him was empty. "I don't feel comfortable with this," I said, trying to keep my voice firm despite the tremor I felt in my hands. "Can I see your badge or ID?" For a split second, his expression darkened. His eyes narrowed and I saw his jaw tense. "Just step out of the car," he growled. "No," I said, my voice shaking with sudden clarity. My hand was now gripping my phone tightly. "Not until you show me some ID." Without warning, his fist slammed against my window. The force made the car shake and I jumped back. He was getting angry. "Open the door," he shouted, his voice now a furious growl. I didn't hesitate. I locked the doors, rolled up the window and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking, but I managed to press the call button. The man outside my window started banging harder. I could see his face now. Twisted, angry, desperate. He was trying to force his way in. "I'm being pulled over by someone who claims to be a cop, but he's not," I said into the phone, my voice trembling. "I'm on Old Mill Road, about 5 miles from town." "Stay in your car," the dispatcher said, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "Can you describe the vehicle?" I looked back. It wasn't a police cruiser. It was an old sedan with a cheap light bar on top. It looked wrong, unmarked. The man wasn't in uniform. This wasn't a cop. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "There are no officers in your area right now. Help is on the way." "No officers?" My breath caught in my throat. That meant this guy wasn't a cop. He was a fraud. A predator. I looked back at him. He was on his phone now, pacing beside his car. His face was twisted in frustration, and I could see him glancing at me every few seconds. Then, without warning, he turned and stormed back to his car. The headlights went off. He sped away, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed on the phone until the real cops arrived, about 10 minutes later. They checked my car, took my statement, but there was nothing they could do. The man was gone, and there weren't any cameras on that stretch of road. I went home that night, but I didn't sleep. I kept seeing his face in my mind, his hand slamming against the window, his cold, demanding voice. I thought about what would have happened if I hadn't stayed in the car. What if I hadn't called 911? A few days later, the cops followed up. They thanked me for calling and told me I did the right thing. But that didn't make me feel any better. From that night on, I stopped driving that road after dark. Every time I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror, I get that sinking feeling in my chest. I know it's probably a real cop, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He might be gone, but that night, it will haunt me forever. It started as an ordinary weekend getaway, a spontaneous escape from the grind of our daily lives. Just me and Livia, two souls eager for a break from the routine. We didn't plan much, just a road trip, exploring back roads and small towns, ending in a cozy cabin somewhere far from the noise, the promise of peace and quiet, the perfect escape. But the road to nowhere would soon lead us into something far more sinister. The sun was setting when we left, casting a warm, deep orange hue over everything. The kind of evening that felt like a painting, peaceful and serene. Livia was snapping pictures, capturing the beauty of the open fields and endless trees as they rolled past. "I love this," she said, smiling, showing me a photo of the empty road ahead. "Just us, no stress, it's perfect." And I agreed, no work, no distractions, just peace. For the first few hours, it was everything we wanted. Laughter, light conversation, the hum of tires on the open road. We passed sleepy little towns with quaint shops and winding streets. The farther we drove, the fewer cars we saw, until it was just us on a narrow two-lane road, surrounded by thick trees. The sky was fading into twilight. I glanced at the GPS. "Should be about 30 minutes until the cabin," I said. Livia nodded, gazing out the window as the trees closed in around us. "It's so quiet," she said softly. I nodded, feeling it too. The usual sounds of city life were long gone. All that remained was the soft hum of the car's engine, the tires grinding against asphalt. "Creepy, huh?" Livia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like we're the only ones out here." I chuckled, trying to shake off the unease creeping into my chest. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one's out here. And that's when it happened. In the distance just ahead, we saw something that didn't belong. Flashing lights, small orange beacons cutting through the darkness. At first I thought it was a car, but as we got closer I saw the orange traffic cones. The road was blocked. We slowed down, coming to a stop a few feet away from the cones. A figure stepped into view, standing next to the roadblock. He was wearing what looked like a uniform, but the lighting was poor, and something about him made my skin prickle. "Roadblock?" Livia asked, squinting. "There's no construction marked on the GPS." I frowned. "I know. This is odd." We sat there, the engine idling. The man slowly approached the driver's side, his face hidden in shadow. But there was no mistaking it. The way he carried himself felt wrong. Something was off. His uniform looked cheap, nothing like an official police outfit. The flash of a flashlight in my face blinded me. "Roll down the window," the man ordered. His voice was sharp, demanding. I hesitated. Something was wrong. No official would stop you like this, not without explaining themselves. I glanced at Livia. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. My stomach knotted, and I looked at her. My hand hovered over the window controls. "What's the problem, officer?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He leaned closer, the flashlight beam cutting into my eyes. "There's a situation ahead," he said, his voice cold. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." I froze. What kind of cop orders you out of the car without an explanation? And where was his police car? There was no sign of one. Only this man and the unsettling glow of his flashlight. Livia was shaking her head. "Don't do it," she whispered. "This feels wrong." I glanced at the roadblock ahead, then to the narrow shoulder. There was just enough room for me to get around it if I was careful. My heart pounded. The man tapped on the window, harder this time, his voice growing more insistent. "Step out now." I didn't move. Instead, I hit the button to lock the doors. The sound of the locks clicking seemed to echo in the silence. The man's face darkened, his eyes flashing with anger. "Get out of the vehicle!" he barked, his voice a growl now. Without thinking, I shifted the car into reverse. Livia gasped, grabbing my arm. The man stepped back, his hands clenched into fists. But I didn't care. I had to get out of there. As soon as I had enough space, I slammed my foot on the gas and swerved the car around the cones, tires crunching on gravel. The man shouted something, but I didn't hear him over the roar of the engine. I just floored it. "Are we being followed?" Livia asked, her voice trembling. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the empty road behind us. "No," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. My heart was still racing, my eyes flicking to the mirror every few seconds. We drove in silence for what felt like hours. The trees blurred past, and I pushed the car faster, trying to outrun the lingering feeling of dread. We finally reached a small gas station, parking under the harsh lights of the canopy. The sense of relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I dialed 911, my hand still trembling. I explained what had happened as best as I could. "We were stopped by someone pretending to be an officer," I told the dispatcher. It didn't feel right. He wasn't official. She stayed calm, asking for our location. "We're near Route 12, just off the main road heading north." She told me to stay on the line and not stop until we were safe. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Livia was still looking over her shoulder, her face pale with fear. "Are they following us?" she asked again. I shook my head. "No, I don't think so." We stayed at the gas station, waiting until the dispatcher told me that officers were on their way to check the area, but I still couldn't shake the unease in my chest. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it didn't feel like the peaceful retreat we had imagined. It felt too remote, too isolated. Every sound made me jump. Livia kept the blinds tightly shut. We didn't talk about what had happened. It hung between us, unspoken but heavy. The next morning, I got a call from the police. They had arrested the man who tried to stop us. But that wasn't the worst of it. There had been 3 other men, hiding behind the bushes, waiting for someone to fall for their trap. The officer explained that this group had been targeting people on isolated roads for weeks. They had been setting up fake roadblocks, trying to lure unsuspecting victims out of their cars. "You two were smart to trust your instincts," the officer said. "Things could have ended much differently." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. We had been so close to something far darker, something we couldn't have predicted. Livia and I packed up to leave, quieter than before. We didn't say much. There was nothing more to say. We were lucky, more than lucky. As we drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened. The weight of it hung in the air, suffocating. The road behind us, the place we'd just escaped, seemed far more dangerous than I'd ever realized. We had been driving straight into a trap. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening at home. But that night, everything changed. Gwen and I had just settled in for the night, the way we had so many times before. The soft hum of the TV, the faint scent of dinner still lingering in the air, and the cozy silence that came with being in our new home. The neighborhood was still unfamiliar, but it had a calming, almost safe vibe to it. So quiet, so peaceful, like the kind of place you could just let your guard down. We were both exhausted from long days at work. Gwen was already dozing beside me on the couch, her breathing steady. I was watching some late-night show, but I wasn't really paying attention. We were ready to drift off to sleep. The clock read 10:45 p.m., a time when the night still felt young, yet we were both on the edge of sleep, comfortable in our little bubble of normalcy. The world outside was empty. No cars driving by, no distant voices, just silence. But then, a knock at the door. The sound cut through the quiet like a knife. Gwen stirred beside me, her eyes fluttering open, confusion clouding her sleepy face. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah. Who's knocking at this time?" I muttered under my breath. We exchanged a look. There was no reason for anyone to be at our door this late. No one in the neighborhood had any reason to visit at this hour. I stood up, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. Something about the knock felt wrong. I walked over to the door, Gwen trailing behind me, her concern palpable. I wasn't usually paranoid, but something about a knock this late at night unsettled me. I peered through the peephole. Standing there in the dim light of our porch was a man. He looked like a police officer, but something felt off. His uniform was neat and pressed, almost too neat, as if he'd just stepped out of a costume shop. His cap was pulled low over his forehead, and his clean-shaven face looked stern. He was probably in his early 40s. Everything about him seemed to fit the part of a police officer: navy blue uniform, patches on the shoulders, shiny badge. But there was something about the way he stood, the way he looked at the door. It was wrong. I cracked the door open just slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" "Good evening." The man's voice was low, calm, but it didn't sit right. "I'm Officer Barnes with the local police. We've had reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood, and I need to come inside to ask you a few questions." A disturbance? We hadn't heard anything. Nothing unusual had happened. The idea of police showing up at this hour felt strange. I tried to keep my voice even. "What kind of disturbance? We haven't seen or heard anything." He didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to the side like he was checking the street. "It's routine," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I just need to make sure everything is okay. Do you mind if I come in?" I felt a cold wave of unease crash over me. He hadn't shown any ID, and now that I was really looking at him, his uniform seemed too perfect, too pristine. His badge was generic, no name, just an emblem. Gwen stepped up behind me, her eyes wide. "Do you think we should let him in?" she whispered. I shook my head slightly. "No." "Can I see your badge and ID?" I asked, my voice firmer now. For a moment he didn't respond. His face remained neutral, but I could see a flicker of something behind his eyes. Something dark. "I'm in uniform," he said after a long pause. "I need you to cooperate and let me inside." That's when my instincts screamed at me. Real officers don't talk like that. Real officers don't make demands like that. Gwen's hand was on my arm, her grip tight. "What do we do?" I didn't take my eyes off the man. "I'll call the station," I said quietly. "I'll confirm." I didn't trust him. Not for a second. "Sir, ma'am." His voice turned cold. "This is official police business. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." That was it. My heart raced as I stepped back, pulling the door halfway shut, locking it in one smooth motion. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. Gwen's face was pale as she stood beside me. "What's happening? Is he still there?" I held the phone to my ear, the sound of the ringing almost deafening in the quiet of the room. "I don't know," I whispered. "Something's not right." The dispatcher answered. I quickly explained what was happening, how a man claiming to be a police officer was at our door, demanding to come in but refusing to show ID. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Do not open the door for anyone. We have no officers assigned to your area tonight." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "No officers," I repeated, my voice rising. "No," the dispatcher confirmed. "We're sending a unit to your location now. Stay inside and keep your doors locked." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Gwen was staring at the door, wide-eyed. "There are no cops in the area," I said, barely able to believe it. "Who is he?" We stood there, frozen, listening to the silence. Then I heard something, movement from the other side of the door. I crept up to the peephole once more. The man was pacing back and forth on the porch now, muttering to himself under his breath. His body language had changed completely. The calm demeanor was gone, replaced with an agitated, almost frantic energy. He kept glancing at the street, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly he stopped, his eyes locked directly on the peephole. Even though he couldn't see me, I could feel his gaze through the door. He took a step forward and my heart stopped. "I know you're still there," he called, his voice louder now, tinged with an eerie, threatening edge. "Open the door, we need to talk." I stepped back, my blood running cold. "I don't think so." Gwen grabbed my arm. "What do we do now?" "We wait," I said, though even as I spoke the words, doubt crept in. What if he didn't wait? What if he tried to force his way in? The minutes dragged on. The tension in the air was suffocating. Then came the sound we'd been waiting for, the distant wail of sirens. The man on the porch stopped knocking. I peeked through the peephole once more. He was walking away, his pace quickening, disappearing into the shadows of the night. The real police arrived moments later. 2 officers in full uniform. Their badges were real. Their IDs were clear. Everything was as it should be. After explaining what had happened, the officers searched the area, but of course the man was gone. People like that don't stick around to be caught. The officers said they were likely working in tandem with someone else, someone waiting around the corner ready to move in if things went south. The thought made my stomach churn. We were lucky. Lucky that we hadn't opened the door. Lucky that we trusted our instincts and called for help before things could get any worse. When the officers left, Gwen and I sat on the couch, still shaken. "I can't believe that happened," she whispered, staring at the locked door. "Neither can I," said, my voice heavy. "But from now on we trust ourselves above everything else." And from that night on, we were more careful, more aware of the world outside. We installed extra locks, set up cameras, and made a pact to never let our guard down, because you never know who might be knocking.